All right, Dick Morris joins us now. It's good to have you on, sir. You have been steadfast in saying that Trump is going to run in this next election. You think he's going to run unopposed, that DeSantis will not stand in his way. They're done with Donald Trump over in Murdoch world. I think that's pretty clear. And I wonder if last night changes your mind at all, because Ron DeSantis was a hero last night and Donald Trump was not.
Well, it makes it more likely that DeSantis would run. That's true, but I think Trump would beat him badly. Remember that DeSantis is getting a lot of credit for increasing the Republican vote in Florida by 17 points. Trump won by 3, he won by 20. But in New York State, where there was no DeSantis, it also rose by 17 points. Trump lost by 22 and Zeldin lost by 5. So I don't think that it's all DeSantis. And I think that the key element for Trump is that no other candidate can say, I did it. You know, is the Republican going to be able to cut inflation and protect job growth? Trump can say, I did it. Will the Republican be able to seal the borders? I did it. Will the Republican candidate be able to say that I've stood up to Russia and China and the rest? I did it. Will he be able to say he cut crime? Trump will say, I did that too. And that fusion of being a challenger who can make promises and an incumbent who can cite a record is something unique to Donald Trump. I also feel that Trump is the only one who has ever really spoken the language of the working class voter and has made them a mainstay of the Republican Party.
He changed the party in that regard. That's absolutely true.
Finally, we know that DeSantis can do well on immigration and education. But how about the economy? How do we know that? Foreign policy. How do we know any of that? And we're betting.
I guess, Dick, the real question I think everybody has and everybody's worried about is whether or not Trump can win a general election. I mean, we all know he's going to be the most formidable person in the primary, but primary is not the election. Does he scare off moderates, and does he surge the other side, which is what a lot of people are alleging right now, that the other side explodes when he's anywhere near the process? And people like Joe Biden get tremendous amount of votes, even though they're barely coherent.
Well, I think that Trump clearly energizes both sides, but you can't discount the fact that he's taken huge blocks of voters that were not Republican and moved them into the party, and nobody else has been able to do that. And it's a hell of a time to find out if they can in the middle of a presidential race of 24. And how do you ignore the being outspent over 2-1? And some of these candidates, like Oz, how did Fetterman win? He got 700,000 votes, early votes. Oz got 100,000.
Right.
Republicans need to get off their butts and vote early. They need to put their money where their mouth is in terms of the stakes of the election. And then let's look at Trump. I think that he has changed the party enormously and energized it. And we have no idea what DeSantis will do. But the more important thing, Rob, is DeSantis would split the Republican Party. The reason all these people are so pro-DeSantis isn't that they love him that much. It's they want to stop Trump. And they know the only way they can is either by Merrick Garland or Ron DeSantis. And either one will split the Republican Party in half, like Ted Kennedy split the Democrats in 1980 and paved the way for Reagan, and this will pave the way for Biden.
I want to play something. This was on Newsmax earlier today. This is Jason Miller talking about, he has asked Trump to wait until after the Georgia special election, which is a month away, to announce. Listen to this.
Of course, President Trump had said that he would be making an announcement on November 15th, next Tuesday. I'm advising the president to hold off until after the Georgia race, after Herschel Walker. Priorities A, B, and C need to be about Herschel right now.
It seems to me that even Jason Miller is worried about how much you would rev up Democrats once Trump makes that announcement, finally makes that announcement.
I agree with Jason on this, but I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason is that Trump does not want this to be an election about him. He wants it to be an election about Biden and the Democratic agenda and about Warnock and his record. And so I think it makes sense not to mix those issues up. But come on, you can't take the enthusiasm Trump generates and the way he turns people out. What other candidate can get 50,000 people to show up in the middle of the week in Podunk?
Nobody
some huge rally.
Nobody
in history
disputes
has
that.
been able to do
Nobody
that.
disputes that. I think the concern that you're hearing from a lot of conservatives is about moderates. But Dick, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Good to see you.